From North Korea to the Middle East, President Trump certainly faced a number of major foreign policy challenges in 2017. Tough talk, tempered by U.S. diplomacy, will likely be Mr. Trump's modus operandi in 2018. While the United States is now relying on China to do more to rein in North Korea and its missile program, the president has labeled China a strategic competitor. Nowhere is that description more apparent than in one of the world's busiest shipping regions. New satellite imagery shows China has built more artificial military bases in the disputed South China Sea. The United States says that action poses a threat to countries in the area, especially for the fishing industry, and it also poses a security threat to the region. What might we expect from China in the coming year? Friend or foe? Well, joining us with some perspective is George Washington University Professor Gregg Brazinsky. He's author of the book Winning the Third World. So, Mr. Brazinsky, friend, foe, strategic competitor, how do you describe China?
Well, I would say China will be a little bit of both. There are clearly areas where we have different interests with China. The South China Sea, as you mentioned, might be one of them. It's an area where the United States is very concerned about freedom of navigation, but China has been very concerned with, number one, its own security, and number two, in making sure that it gains the upper hands in territorial disputes. I also think that we have somewhat divergent interests on North Korea, although there are also issues on the Korean Peninsula where I think the United States and China can work together. I think the economies of the United States and China have become very deeply interconnected, as everybody knows. Our companies from Silicon Valley are extremely active and increasingly reliant on China for greater profits. And, trade with China China remains a leading trading partner of the United States. And so I think economically the two are interconnected. So I think in the coming year, we'll probably see a continuing blend of competition and cooperation in U.S. relations with China. I think one aspect of the Trump administration is that you see both of these aspects spoken about very vocally. 1 minute Trump is saying, oh, the Chinese are our good friends and our allies, and you'll have these very cordial meetings and summits with Xi Jinping. The next minute, he's talking about how the Chinese are competitors. So I think, one of the differences between, say, the Trump administration and previous administrations is I think, the previous administrations, they all knew that we were going to have a blend of competition and cooperation in our relationship with China. The Trump administration, I think it's the same thing, but it's just more vocal about what the areas of competition are and what the potential areas of cooperation are.
Well, why are the Chinese continuing to build bases in the South China Sea, even though they know it may damage relations not only with the U.S., but also China's neighbors? And is Trump likely to just allow them to be a hegemon in that area?
Well, I think, first of all, why are they doing it? China has drawn what they call a 9-dash line, or, sometimes it's been an 11-dash line, which is not recognized by international law. But nonetheless, China says that everything that falls within that line is Chinese territory. I think there's a lot of reasons why China is so insistent on the 9-dash line. Some of them are strategic. They give China a strategic advantage in any potential conflict with the United States or its allies if it's able to sort of create a reality that is China's border. I think I think it's also sort of a cultural and ideological issue that connects to Chinese nationalism. There's this sense that China is going to reclaim its territory and that it's not going to be bullied by the United States or the West.
Another potential flashpoint, of course, North Korea. And I know that China has gone along with the UN sanctions, tougher sanctions against North Korea. But yet I just saw the other day some satellite imagery of Chinese ships trading oil with North Korea. So how likely will it be that Trump will be able to use China against North Korea to rein them in?
I never thought that trying to use China against North Korea was a good idea or a good strategy. I don't think China will ever give us what we want on North Korea, in part because their perception of North Korea is very different from the perception of North Korea in the United States. In the United States, we tend more or less to take a view of North Korea as dangerous, threatening, evil, crazy. All of those things are how the Trump administration has tended to characterize Kim Jong Un and the North Korean regime. I think there's growing disillusionment with North Korea among the Chinese and China's leadership, but there's also still some part of China's leadership which is sympathetic towards North Korea. The two countries have a long history together as allies. China, of course, dispatched millions of Chinese volunteers to aid North Korea during the Korean War in 1950 to 1953 and make sure that North Korea was not obliterated. There was a long history of fraternal solidarity between China and North Korea, and even though that's faded, I think there's some part of it that's still there. The idea of North Korea as a buffer is something that still figures into the mindsets of some Chinese policymakers, although there's also some other Chinese policymakers who are expressing privately different views about North Korea and saying, well, it's actually not such a strategic asset anymore because, one, it can drag China into war, and two, these nuclear tests also can pose a danger to China. They may go along with sanctions in the UN, but they're never going to completely clamp down on all of the Chinese businesses that are engaged with North Korea in one way or another.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on it in 2018. Professor Gregg Brazinsky, thanks for joining us today from George Washington University. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me.